to lead off, I guess maybe you could talk a little bit about how your teaching approach here with rally racing might differ from how other people approach it, or what makes the school unique.
Well, I would think that some of the best training I've ever received in the military and the aviation industry, it's the same.
Right.
So I guess the best training is the same.
Right.
So the methodical crawl foundation building. So we teach you crawl, walk, run. So you learn the basics of one maneuver. Mm-hmm. Once you've mastered that, we add another maneuver. And sometimes you don't get to master it before we move on to the next one. Mm-hmm. So so how this works is we're gonna start working on left foot braking. Mm-hmm. And now you gotta work on just leaving the gas alone. And the next step is to work on the gas and then minimizing the steering. And then the next thing is where to look, what you do with your eyes. Then the next thing we'll work on is the braking and how much brake and get used to the brake. And once you've gotten good at understanding each single element, then we add more to it.
What makes this unique for me, at least, is that I have Chris here, not your Chris, my Chris, the Kiwi, and the interplay of driver and, I guess it's co-pilot or what?
You can call it co-pilot or navigator.
Navigator. So how do you train two people at the same time over the next few days? I mean, is it you show one person, then you swap, or how does that work?
Well, because part of the learning process is watching others.
Right.
So we tell you, and then we show you, and then you watch, and then you do it. Yeah. Then you watch somebody else do it, and then eventually you explain it.
Right.
That's when you really master it. When you tell me, right.
Right. Okay. No,
so
that makes sense.
How it's going to work, I think, with you and Chris is we're going to teach you both to drive. Mm-hmm. And throughout this process of both driving, you're going to realize, both of you are going to realize that, okay, generally I'm really good at this and I'm not so good at that, and I got to work on. You kind of get to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. Then towards the end of the week, we're going to put you into making notes and making pace notes and understanding the rally navigation. So he's going to have to read to you the notes, and you have to understand, because you can't drive visual. If you go with what you see, by the time you get there, it's too late. Yeah. So we've got to go with what we hear. Yeah. So if you're going flying down the road and the road looks like it goes straight and you hear hairpin right, you're going to brake instead of accelerate.
Right.
So you're going to go with what you hear. And that's really hard to do, because when the body gets overwhelmed and stressed out, it starts shutting down systems. Right. And the first system shuts down is your hearing.
How convenient.
Right? Yeah. So we see it all the time in the rally. The guy goes straight off the road and he's yelling at the co-driver. It's like, you didn't tell me, you didn't tell me. And you run the video back.
He was telling
and
him.
The guy's screaming and beating him on the head with a flashlight to slow down. And the guy's like, I never heard anything. Because his system shut down. So we've got to learn to be able to drive with what we hear. And there needs to be some trust as well. So you need to trust him that he's going to give the right information. He needs to trust you that you're not going to kill him.
Kill him, yeah.
And then you need to work on that communication where you like to hear certain words. When it comes time to slow down, maybe you want to hear brake, or maybe you want to hear caution.
Right.
Or we were joking, like, if you're not listening, then maybe he's got to use the word Timothy.
Right.
Which is what our mother called us when we were really bad, and we paid attention Monday.
She snapped to attention, yeah.
Right.
What characterizes a good driver versus a good navigator? I mean, I imagine they might be different skill sets. So what makes a sort of great driver and a great navigator?
Everything is a generalization here, right? Because there's all kinds of ways of doing it. But generally, the co-driver is very detail-oriented, more OCD, everything has to be in order. They're very much perfectionists.
Fold their socks and underwear kind of guy.
Exactly. You go to their closet and you see all the shoes lined up. There's your co-driver, right? Yeah. They also have to not be getting car sick. That helps a lot.
Yeah, because they're looking at text.
Right. If you're reading, So some people, but they can wear the patch. So, maybe they're really OCD and they're really adventurous, but they tend to feel bad, so give them the patch. Yeah. So the other thing is, they gotta probably know that you're a better driver than they are. Because if you're riding in the car and you know the driver's not very good, you're gonna be nervous.
Right.
But if you trust that person, it's just like kind of when we went for a ride, I explained the whole thing, showed you all my trophies, built up the confidence that you knew that I was a professional and that I probably wouldn't whine you into a tree.
Right.
So then you could relax.
Yeah.
So it's the same sort of thing. You work together until the co-driver has a lot of trust and confidence in your abilities.
And on the driving side, what do you see in students who learn the fastest, who pick this up the fastest? What do they share in common?
I would say that the people that have picked it up the quickest have generally been good at something else. So whether they're skiers or bikers, champions, past champions, because they went through the process of learning and they struggled and they went through and they kept trying, and even though they were frustrated, they kept trying it until they had that breakthrough, and then they mastered it. Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard for people that have never mastered anything.
So they anticipate a lot of the stumbling blocks.
Yes, it's like, oh, I know, yeah, this is going to be hard, but I'll get through it if I just keep puttering. And then they also have an understanding of their learning style. Mm-hmm. It helps if you know your own learning style. Right. And I think that's part of what school is people teaching people what their learning style is. So, for example, I've been an automobile mechanic for all my life before I did this. And I had to read the book after I touched the car. Right. So I have to like find out where the alternator is, where the starter is, and it's like, where's the wire? Okay, now I can look at the book. Right. Well, I know a lot of people can read a book, go right to the problem, fix it. So I knew there's no way need to waste time looking at the book until after I've looked at the car. Right. Or the other thing you asked about the qualities of a driver, I think that the driver has to be good at winging it. Where I've seen a lot of drivers that are very detail-oriented. Yeah. That works. But most of the time on rallying, you want to try to use the right maneuver at the right time. But if that doesn't work, you've got to be quickly ready to try something else and improvise. And the other thing is I think the driver needs to know enough about cars or mechanical. I would say mechanical aptitude isn't necessary for everyone. But overall, the more you know about cars, the less likely you'll break them. Right. So if you don't understand how a clutch works, you're going to be revving the engine and slipping the clutch and burning out clutches, or breaking transmissions if you don't know how they work, or don't know what a strut does. So the more you know about cars, the easier you'll be on the car. Even though you're going 100 miles an hour to the woods, you're not hitting the rocks. Right. You're not braking over the bumps. Yeah. You're making sure when you shift that the clutch is all the way in before the shifter goes in, and the clutch is out when it's in. So I think that's important, to have a little mechanical understanding. And beyond that, there's a lot of other variables. I think it's important that you've learned how to compartmentalize your fear and know that you're always going to be a little scared or nervous.
How do you compartmentalize your fear?
Well, there's a lot of ways of doing it. I think the biggest thing is just understanding that, hey, you go and do a lot of adrenaline-filled things. Right. And with me, my left knee used to jump all the time. When I raced stock cars, and then I used to start, my right foot would jump. And I was sitting at the start line at this big race with all these crazy people around me, and it's like, stop it, I couldn't. So I learned to just keep doing it until I get used to it. And like we talked about the checklist, the procedure I go through when I master switch on, ignition on, fire system check, every one of the systems. By going through my checklist, it sort of makes me relax more, because I didn't forget a switch or whatever reason. Right. It seems to me that having a mental checklist that you do every time. And then there's also a little bit of superstition here. Yeah. So if you have your lucky book or your lucky badge, or we used to have, I remember I had an angel pin with checkered flags on it somebody gave me. I wouldn't go anywhere without that. Yeah. If I had my favorite drink in the morning or my favorite whatever. Yeah. So there's a little bit about that. Yeah. So I say overall the sort of mystery with rallying is learning the braking maneuvers and the stuff that we already talked about, braking, trail braking, pendulum turn, learning the maneuvers, understanding enough about cars so you don't break it, understanding enough about rally navigation so you drive with what you hear. And then the fourth element is making sure you have your lucky pin and that you're on your game and you show up early and your co-driver is great and everything is together so you can be 100%. Right. That's really the mystery.
What is the reasoning for using the two-wheel drive before the four-wheel drive? I guess intuitively I would think, oh, the four-wheel drive is going to give you more traction, it'll be easier to use.
And better braking.
Right, so why do you start with and why front-wheel drive as opposed to rear-wheel drive? This isn't something that I was...
So one of the reasons why I believe the Scandinavians, the Finnish guys, the Swedish guys, they were the best drivers on gravel. And they all mastered front-wheel drive first. And then they transitioned to all-wheel drive. So Stig Blomqvist, my hero, says, you've got to master front-wheel drive before you can go to all-wheel drive. So I just did it. Right. Because he said so. Right. But later I learned how true it was because of the fact that with front-wheel drive, you really can't just give it gas and have it go around a corner because it's front-wheel drive. It just goes straight if you do that. Right. So you have to come in and use the brake to get it to turn. So you've got to come in way too fast, be hard on the gas, too fast, and turn in and use that brake. or in some cases you brake and then turn. But either way, you need to get good at left foot braking. And by driving a front wheel drive, it made you have to be good at left foot braking. You just will not do well.
Yeah.
And it came from the old days when the Saabs first showed up, and they'd let off the gas, and there was no deceleration because they were two strokes.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't turn. So they had to use the brake to get it to turn. Then they realized if they used the brake, they don't have to let off the gas. So they didn't have any power, so they never let off the gas. They just held it to the floor and just turned and brake.
Yeah.
So that managed to keep the speed through the corner. So they won in these really slow, underpowered cars because they ended up carrying their speed.
Yeah,
and
they weren't letting
momentum.
off the accelerator. Right.
Right. So this is like the rental car technique, we'll say. You've got no power. You've got to have a good, clean line. Keep your foot on it. Don't let off the gas. Don't brake too much. Brake just enough to get it to turn. So then when you master that also, when the car goes sideways and you have oversteer, you're going to have to look and steer and stay on the gas. So that also teaches you when the car's losing control or you're really going fast around a corner, powering through the corner and powering out of the skid is beneficial. Front-wheel drive teaches you that. And so you learn a lot on the front-wheel drive, a lot of different things, and then you go to all-wheel drive.
Right.
Now, all-wheel drive, it's like slightly different. It doesn't really turn with gas and brake. You've got to let off the gas a little and brake a little less. So you got to learn that with all-wheel drive. You're using a very similar technique than is front-wheel drive, but slight changes.
Yeah.
And then when you transition to rear-wheel drive, you have to kind of go back to what you knew before you got here, which is let off the gas a lot, only brake in a straight line. Braking in the corner, you have to be really good at left foot braking, so that's why we wait. And plus, we want to break your bad habits. So we got lifters and turners and late breakers, and we have a whole list of most common human mistakes in rally. So once we get to the rear-wheel drive, we've basically broken all your bad habits.
Capital sins of rally.
Right. And then you can kind of go back to your rear-wheel drive if you want.
Got it.
And I try to tell people, if you're never going to drive a rear-wheel drive, don't bother. Just stay with front-wheel drive. And it's really hard to master the go from front to rear to all. It's really hard to, when you're on the limit and you're rally driving, to be able to change vehicle platforms easily.
That's extremely important for the military or tactical guys.
Right, they need to be able to be good at that. So when you first start off and you master front-wheel drive, the next couple of days you'll master front-wheel drive. Then I'm going to put you in all-wheel drive. You're like, oh man, all right, I got to think over. And then after rear-wheel drive, and then front-wheel drive, and rear-wheel drive, and all-wheel drive. And after a while, you'll be able to just jump in. Cool. You spin the tires, steering gets light. Front-wheel drive, oh, got to stay on the gas and brake a lot when I turn. Okay, got it. All-wheel drive, oh, whoa, it's pulling, and oh, this must be all-wheel drive. Well, I better lift more, brake less. You know, rear-wheel drive, it's like you step on the gas and the thing jumps sideways. Okay, I got to switch my mode into this. So,
is there anything that is very difficult in rally racing that maybe seems simple to the untrained eye, or the other way around, something that looks very fancy or difficult that's actually quite easy to do?
There's a bunch of that probably. I would say the jumping, like we talked about, the crests.
Yeah.
A lot of people see jumping a car is very difficult.
Yeah.
It's not that hard if the road is straight and you're going straight.
Right.
It gets difficult when you have a turn and then you have a crest, or you have a crest and then a turn.
Yeah.
So the idea is when you have a crest, the car is going to get light. It will not turn once it gets light. Yeah. So you have to make sure that the car is set up in the right direction with the wheel straight
before it becomes light.
Before it gets light. Because if you're sideways when it gets light, you're going to land sideways, and that's ugly.
Yeah.
If you're trying to turn and it gets light, it's not going to turn, and that gets ugly. You become an unhappy motorist at that point.
Right.
So
you might make some trees unhappy too.
Right. And if your wheels are turned when you land, that's also bad.
If I wanted to do some additional homework myself, let's say on my own, which other people could also replicate, are there any particular books or resources, let's say, to get familiar with the mechanics of the car? I know very little about car mechanics.
Well, we're going to go through some of that, yes.
Okay.
We are putting out a book pretty soon.
Oh, great.
I know you've written a book. I'm very impressed because I've been trying to do my book for about 8 or 9 years.
It's a masochistic exercise.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, I'd rather rebuild this engine than... So
if I could rebuild engines, I would rather rebuild an engine than write books too.
So maybe you ought to finish the book for me now. But I can go through like some of the things, like I tell people, left foot braking. Yeah. When you get used to driving your car on the street, you got to be a little careful because it could be somebody following you. Use your left foot on the clutch differently than your brake. Your clutch foot you use your knee and in and out like a light switch, on and off, in and out for the clutch. But when you use your left foot on the brake, you got to put your heel on the floor and use it like a progressive, like a rheostat on a light switch. Smooth on, smooth off. Using your heel on the floor gets your ankle working. Then you use your knee for the clutch and your ankle for the brake, knee for the clutch. So then when you're left foot braking and now it's time to shift, well, then just right foot brake and shift like normal, back to left foot braking. Get your feet going. Clutch, brake, knee, ankle. So you get used to doing that. That helps.
Yeah.
Another thing is also, if you get into a skid and you practice, look where you want to go.
Right.
The natural human tendency is for people to look at things they don't want to hit.
Which means they...
Right, like even rocks and holes in the road.
Yeah.
You want to look where you want that tire. So that way you don't run over things.
Right.
But also when you get into a skid, you now got to look that way and steer that way. If it's an oversteer skid, there's 5 skids. Oversteer skid, you need to look and steer. That also helps as to where you look. And the other thing is visualize how you would respond to every situation. Every emergency situation you get into, there's a proper response. And it's most people just haven't thought it through.
Right.
I have had people say, well, if a moose jumps out in front of you, you're going to die. It's like, yeah, I guess you probably would if that's what you're thinking. Because if you think, I've had moose step out in front of me, and I've managed to miss most of them. So what is it that difference? They haven't thought it through.
Yeah. First thing, the eyes won't reflect, right? You had mentioned
Right,
that.
right.
4 sticks in the road.
Right. 4
too
sticks
high
in the
up.
road, and you're going, uh-oh, this isn't good. Let off the gas and brake hard. While you're braking really hard, you're looking for a way out, and there's the back of the animal, because they're not going to run backwards. They're going to go forwards. So you look at the moose butt. And when you realize you can't slow down anymore, you've tried everything you can, then if it's an ABS car, you can just turn and turn back.
Right.
And then counter steer. If it's a non-ABS car, you got to let off the brakes and turn back and counter steer. And imagine looking towards the back of the animal and turning, and as soon as you turn, you have to immediately turn back, because that's a bit dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. You could, like on the commercial I see on TV, the squirrel runs out in front of the wagon and they hit the tree.
Yeah, right.
That's when they say hit the squirrel.
Right.
If you don't have the skills and you never thought it through, then run over the squirrel.
Right.
What if it's a moose?
Yeah.
Don't hit the moose.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 2 different techniques here for squirrel and moose. Well, maybe. If you're not sure it's a little animal, maybe you could. But overall, I miss the squirrels and the moose.
What would you, within the world of teaching or teaching rally, what would you say you are world class at? Or what would other people say you are world class at?
Winning with underpowered vehicles.
Okay.
Right, so driving a standard car, production, any of the production classes, they used to have group N classes, or now the R classes. That's where that momentum, carrying the speed. I've done other open class and all-wheel drive, but I've never really had the money or the sponsors to get into that. So basically, I'm kind of forced into being the fastest of the slow cars because that's all I could afford.
Right.
Plus, it's the basis and foundation of all rally driving.
Right.
So once you've mastered that, then mastering the other stuff is actually kind of easy.
Yeah, right.
So I like kind of bringing new people into the sport. I love the education, the training. I love meeting people's objectives. They come here, I want to be a better driver. I want to learn how to avoid hitting moose or whatever. So for me to have just one world champion guy work with him doesn't make sense. I'd rather have hundreds and hundreds of people coming and training. That I get more out of it that way. So learning, teaching people how to drive slow cars fast. Also, so I would say that's my thing. That's the answer. I also like developing vehicles. So manufacturers like Ford says, okay, we want to rally the ST, the Focus Fiesta ST. Okay, fine. I look at that car and I test it and I do different things to the car and jack it up and change the springs and put skid plates and try this. I really enjoy developing vehicles to the point where somebody can just like buy the car, bolt in a roll cage and go racing.
Right.
It's kind of the opposite of the WRC that are spending $1 million an example. I like to be able to see how lower cost I can get somebody into it, and I'd like to see how fast I can make a slow car go.
I like that. It's very elegant.
Yeah.
And you're trying to make the most of this sort of constrained toolkit.
Right.
That's fun.
Being efficient, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what happens when you're raised in the woods and you're a hick. You learn to get really good at that stuff. So
speaking of getting good, I mean, I know we have a very compressed timeline here. I mean, realistically, I guess we're going to have to cram sort of 4 days into 3, in effect, maybe a little bit more time. But how much do you think Chris and I can improve over the next time that we have together?
Oh, I think no matter how much time we have, you are going to be amazed on how good you're going to get.
Awesome.
I would say, depending on all the variables of not having time and us talking about stuff instead of driving,
Yeah.
I think you'd be ready to enter your first rally at the end of this week.
Fantastic.
And a lot of people think that's amazing, but I think that's what I expect to see.